Hey class, today we are going to be talking about consonants. Actually, that's what this whole week is about, so let me share my screen with you and let's get started. Okay, so this is going to be broken up into short lectures, so it's not too much at once. So this first lecture is just going to be an overview, but then we're going to delve into the different ways we talk about consonants in individual lectures. So don't get too bogged down in this first lecture. This is just to introduce you to some of the terminology. Okay, so our objectives for today are to talk about where consonants sit in the IPA consonant chart. We're going to talk about the different ways that we produce consonants with our articulators. We're going to talk about the way we describe consonants. And we're going to talk about the clinical significance of these parameters that we use to talk about consonants, as some of you are planning to be SLPs in the future. So this is a clinical phonetics class. I want to make sure you see how this fits into our practice. Okay, so um, this is the International Phonetic Alphabet. We are not learning all the symbols in here, but you will see today that we're going to be talking about this top chart, which is the IPA consonant chart. And we're going to be talking about it along the two planes, so the horizontal plane and the vertical plane. Okay. Okay. So just a reminder, the IPA is used to transcribe sounds, phonemes that are pronounced. So not letters, but actual sounds. There is one symbol for each sound. Although it sometimes looks like there's a digraph or two letters, it's only one, it just makes up one symbol. We're only going to be learning a subset of these. Um, and when we talk, we'll see um, an example of this. So the way that this chart is arranged is actually the way that articulators are used to create these sounds. So that will make more sense as we kind of get into it in a few minutes. Um, Remember not to get hung up sometimes on letters. So for example, the y, as in the word beginning sound in the word yellow, looks like a J. So you're just gonna have to train your brain to think in IPA so that you don't get it mixed up. Okay. And lastly, we're only concentrating on standard American English phonemes, so don't worry about some of the other symbols on this chart. Okay. All right, so here's the simplified version that we're going to be using. And what we're going to be talking about today is where the sounds sit both horizontally. So you see where it says place up at the top, and then it has all those labels, bilabial, labiodental, dental, which really refer to our articulators, as well as where our articulators are moving towards in our supralaryngeal vocal tract. And then along the vertical axis here is what we call manner. And that's where there's an obstruction in the airflow that happens when we're producing consonants. And then you'll see also voiceless and voiced. We're going to have a whole lecture on that. But basically, voiced means that your vocal cords are vibrating. And we talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the course. So we've already talked about vowels. Vowels are made with an unobstructed vocal tract. So the main thing that is differentiating vowels and consonants is consonants involve an obstruction or constriction in the vocal tract. Okay, so as future clinicians, it's important to remember there's many more consonants than vowels, um, but both are important. Both vowels and consonants are important for different reasons. Vowels are important because they're the nucleus of the syllable, with a very few exceptions. So an example here is in the word table. The BLE acts as a syllabic consonant. Don't worry about that now. We're going to talk about syllables later on. For the most part, vowels make up the nucleus. Vowels have what's called lexical value. So a single vowel can represent a word. So, for example, I, a personal pronoun, or a, ah, sorry, with my voice here. If you were saying uh, a bag, so using it as an article, it has value as a word. Consonants don't stand alone as a word, right? But they do have what we call morphemic value. So they act as morphemes. So just as a reminder, we talked about this in the first lesson. Morphemes are what we can add. They could be free, so they can stand alone, or they could be added to add meaning to another word. So for example, the consonant S marks plurals and possessives. So it has value, but when we're transcribing it in IPA, we have to be careful that we are transcribing what we hear. Okay, so when we're talking about its phonemic properties, sometimes the letter S at the end of a word marking it as plural can be produced sounding more like Z. So if you were saying the word dogs, it's not dogs, it's dogs with the Z sound. So that's just something to keep in mind. And it's important because if you're working with a child on particular sounds, you want to make sure that you're accurate when you're giving them targets. Often when we're working with children with disordered speech, we are often working on consonants. There are disorders where vowels are affected, but those are pretty rare. Most of the time we're working on consonants. Okay, so I wanted to draw your attention to Appendix B and Table B1 in your textbook. I think this is a really thing to have handy as we're starting to go into transcription exercises. So it might help to look at this and have it available because what it's going to do is help you if you kind of get stuck on transcription and you're not sure about a sound. So this is giving you information about where certain phonemes can appear in a word. So for example, this first set of phonemes that they're showing here never occurs in word initial position. So when you're transcribing, you would never find that in word initial position. Likewise, they give you the example that these consonants never occur in word final position in the next row. So I think this is just a helpful thing to have available when you start to work on your transcriptions. Make sure that you take a look at this. Okay. Also, as you'll see, top part is talking about consonants, but then they do talk about vowels in relation to syllables. So when we eventually get into syllables in more detail, this will be helpful to have for those exercises. Okay. So the individual lectures today are going to talk about what parameters we use to describe consonants. So one of the parameters we use is whether a sound is voiced or voiceless. If your vocal cords are moving when you produce the sound, it's voiced. If they're not moving, it's considered voiceless. On the international IPA chart, you will see that it's organized voiceless, voiced. So the symbol on the left is voiceless, the symbol on the right is voiced. And in our chart, we put it in separate rows, okay, the one that we're using. Place of articulation is the horizontal axis in the IPA chart, and that is really referring to the articulators. So for example, bilabial is one of the places of articulation, and that's referring to our lips. Manner of articulation is referring to how much of an obstruction there is. So this is in the vertical dimension on our IPA chart. Oops, sorry about that, guys. Okay. Just accidentally touch something. All right. Okay, so vertical dimension. Um, so for example, one of the manners of articulation is called stops, and that means that there's a complete obstruction in the vocal tract, which allows for the airflow to have a what we call a plosive quality in some of the stops. So we're going to talk about that in more detail as we go through the manner lecture. Okay, so as I just said, place of articulation is in the horizontal axis, manner is in the vertical axis, and as I had also said, the chart is really arranged based on how we articulate the sounds. So we start from the left in the front of the mouth, and then we go all the way to the back of the mouth. So you see bilabial is our lips in the front of the mouth, and then we go all the way back to palatal and glottal. So all the way back, the back articulators or back sounds. So we'll talk about that. And then when we're looking at the manner of articulation, we're talking about levels of constriction of airflow. So we start with stop, so completely obstructed or constricted, and then we go all the way down to sounds that are more vowel-like because the constriction is not completely closed. It's more open, not completely like a vowel, but more vowel-like. So that's why it moves in that direction. Okay, so as air is moving through our vocal tract, past the vocal folds, we make obstructions along the vocal tract. And we talked about this the first week when we were comparing our vocal tract to a trombone, right? So when we make these obstructions, it helps us to create different sounds, different phonemes. Place is really telling you where the sound is formed and which articulators are moving and what they're moving towards. So I mentioned bilabial for lips. Alveolar is a place, meaning that the tongue is moving towards the alveolar ridge. Okay. Manner is telling you how a sound is formed and how the airstream is constricted and how narrowly. So I already said a stop is completely blocked. A nasal sound means the oral cavity is blocked, so air is flowing through the nasal cavity. So we're going to go into this in details, but that's just kind of high level information for you. Okay, so I will see you in the next lecture.